Wheatley, and welcome to episode 225 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Subitza for joining us last week to talk about, well, she's a chocolate sommelier. If you haven't listened to it, you should go back and listen to it because it's really interesting. And I was going to say who doesn't like chocolate. We had a guest about 3 weeks ago who doesn't actually like chocolate, which was, but I love chocolate anyways, and we got to chat about it. If you don't mind, you could subscribe to our YouTube channel. It always helps. We have a buy me a coffee link in the description as well if you're interested in that. I'm moving house, so I need it now more than ever. I know that is a joke, by the way. So I want to introduce this week's guest. More importantly, she's the author of acclaimed novel Nora, and her latest novel is called Seaborn. Nuala O'Connor, how are you doing, Nuala?
I'm grand, Derek. Thanks a million.
Thanks very much for doing this, by the way. And I have to admit, I mentioned this to Nuala already, but for people who are normally watching this podcast, they will notice the bareness behind me. But yes, I'll be moving house, so hopefully it's a sad day actually, Nuala, because I've done 225 episodes in this corner, so now I'm going to be moving to a new place and trying to figure out the next corner and how I'll hang stuff up on the wall. But anyway, we'll get into it. We always start, Nuala, with a history of your upbringing, please.
Oh, okay. So I was born in Dublin in 1970. I'm the fifth in a family of 7 children. My father was a Servite brother before he left that and married my mother. They knew each other since childhood. They grew up in the same place in Dublin, and he was a little older than her. So he was very Catholic, super Catholic. In fact, we didn't just go to mass. We went to prayer meetings. We went to hands-on healing sessions. We were in the charismatic renewal movement for a while. We went to folk masses in Dublin City, and there was, a lot of religious folk that hung around our family, I guess. I loved all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was a child who loved singing. I loved the ritual of mass. I loved the smells. I loved the art. I loved the iconography. In fact, I still love all of that stuff, including the built architecture of the church. What I don't love is the oppression of women. But I would have come to that later. I was quite devout, I suppose, until I was about 18. And then obviously you become an adult and you start to question things. You don't necessarily believe everything your parents tell you anymore. You're forging your own life. I would have had quite a sheltered childhood, really. So we lived away from the town. We lived in the Liffey Valley, which is not a shopping centre, it's a place beside the River Liffey, quite rural, even though it was only half a mile from the town. So surrounded by fields, cows, horses, whatever. The river was our playground. And I had a very nice kind of semi-feral, unencumbered childhood, in a sense that we were let run free around the fields with ourselves and the neighbour kids. We had a lot of fun building rafts and being in the water. And then my father was very good. He knew the natural world very well, and he taught us a lot about plants and animals and things like that. We'd go for walks with him deeper into the fields and into the woods up towards Lucan. So I enjoyed my childhood, is what I want to say. Having said that, I was what was known as a house devil street angel. Other way around,
Okay.
sorry. No. Yeah, other way around. I was a house devil street angel. Did I get that wrong?
You got that right the first time, yeah.
Oh, did I? Yeah.
Yeah.
I always kind of feel like I'm saying it wrong. So I was prone to what would have been called tantrums as a child. My neighbour christened me the little cursor. I had foul language learned from my siblings, I suppose. And at school, I was this angelic, studious, academic child. I went to a girls' school in Dublin city centre. So we didn't even go to school in the locality, and we didn't do our religious stuff in the locality. So while we lived in Palmerstown in West Dublin, we weren't of it. We were of Mill Lane, which was our part of the Liffey Valley. So we were kind of insular, kind of isolated, though we were friends with the neighbours. So yes, I had these inexplicable tantrums as a child, and nobody really knew why. And I do remember my mother saying to me on several occasions, I think there's something wrong with your brain. And I wasn't brought to the doctor or anything because doctor visits were rare. I guess they were just another expense in the large expense of a large family. And I remember just before my leaving cert having some kind of mental, what it felt like a mental arrest, like a kind of I couldn't move forward. My boyfriend, I had found out, was cheating on me, and I was fearful of the exams, even though I was academic and bright. And my mother sent me to the GP. And just being at the GP actually released something. I think being taken seriously, that there was something, I wasn't feeling good, and I couldn't explain what it was. So we were also, apart from being very religious, it was a non-drinking household. There was no alcohol in our lives. There was none in the house. My father didn't go to the pub. There was none of that. But then I went to college at 18 and discovered alcohol, essentially. And I suppose I changed overnight. I became less the good, sheltered Catholic girl and more the all smoking, all drinking party animal, throwing off really the values of my childhood, and really then having this big struggle between being good and being bad, you know. We hadn't got a lot of guidance at home, and I'm not blaming my parents. They were extremely busy people. They had a lot on their hands, and they were also quite busy helping other people. My mother cared for her brother. She cared for one of her other brothers when that brother died. You know, they were always doing for other people in a very Christian way. But and I'm not saying we were neglected. We were fed, we were watered, we were clothed, all of that. But I guess there wasn't much guidance, and certainly your mental health wasn't something that was taken seriously, and sometimes not even your physical health. In a sense, we weren't allowed to be sick, and we weren't allowed to cry. So there are two things that are just totally make a person ripe for internalized ableism, so that you don't believe it's good to be sick and you don't believe it's good to be emotional. But I was an extremely sensitive individual, and I was always being told I was too sensitive, too emotional, stop crying, all of this stuff. I probably should say now that later in life I was diagnosed as autistic. So it turns out that my tantrums were actually meltdowns, that I was keeping it together in school and being good and obedient because I felt that's the way you have to act. And then at home, it was like a valve going off when I'd get home, and I would just release all the pressure and of holding it together all day, because I was very sensitive to sound, light, smells, all of those things. And I got a bus into town to school every day, diesel engines, smelly, noisy, full of people with their smelly coats and smelly hair. And all of that really affected me, but I had no way to articulate it. Having said that, because I'm in my 50s, there isn't a chance as a girl I would have been diagnosed with autism. Very, very low chance. A, in my family that avoided doctors, and B, in the sense that I was bright, obedient academic. And it turns out they are very high markers for autistic girls. Subsequent research has discovered that autistic girls are often all of those things. So that's me in a nutshell, up to maybe the age of about 20-ish.
Yeah, I want, like, you know, the idea of being diagnosed, and it's looking back, is it easier for you to, you know, or is there a sense of ease that you can see why you were having these tantrums? Is it something that kind of not so much reassures you, but it gives you kind of I suppose it gives you a reason as to what was happening?
Listen, 1,000% relieved. Hannah Gadsby, the Australian comedian, said that getting her autism diagnosis in her 30s was like, I think she said it was like a sloughing off of shame. I'm badly quoting her, I can't remember. But it was to do with getting rid of the shame about who you were, always feeling like the odd one out, the quirky one, the one who couldn't fit in, the one who failed at friendships, the one who wore weird clothes, the one who said the wrong thing, blurted things out. So getting the diagnosis at 52, which is 2 years ago now, really gave me a deep, deep understanding of all of my struggles through my life. So when I took to alcohol with gusto, I kept that up for a long time. Even though I knew it was bad for me, I still kept drinking as a social crutch, as Dutch courage, as a way to be gregarious when I felt anything but, as a way to fit in. And I drank for years and years and years and years. And I finally gave up 4 years ago. I had pulled back hugely from it. but I gave up 4 years ago, and that really led to the autism diagnosis, because with alcohol away, my body and brain had time to clear out and calm down enough to take a deeper dive than I had ever taken, because I'm another autistic trait for women is to be very self-analytical and trying to figure oneself out all the time. So I took an even deeper dive and discovered that I probably was autistic. And it's funny, my siblings and I had joked when we were young. We used to say to each other, "You're so spectrumy," because we could recognize certain, even though it was considered a male condition when we were young, we could see that our creativity, our trickiness around friendships, our loner tendencies, our sort of obsessive nature about the things we were interested in. And I use the word obsession in a positive sense. I don't see it as a negative thing to be obsessed with something and to devote yourself to it. We could see that they were sort of autistic traits. And so we would joke about that. And now it turns out, yeah, a couple of us have been diagnosed, and the rest are kind of nodding their head in agreement and maybe thinking about being diagnosed, or not bothering because they're happy enough to just know.
Yeah, that's another one that I've spoken to recently, to someone who's teaching me how to drive, actually. And he was talking about the idea of people maybe being too nervous to be diagnosed, or not wanting to have a label put on them, which, look, and that's obviously their own thing. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the whole label thing, because I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, and it wasn't like, oh no, it was almost like you were saying, there was almost like something to say, like, well, this is why I do this and this in certain ways, and it helped me. But did it ever cross your mind that, like, you mightn't want to know?
No.
Okay.
Because I have been trying to figure myself out for years. I have gone to counselors, and, like, funny enough, everything I would say to counselors about my anxiety in public and around people, my preference for being a hermit, my out of body experiences when I'm on stage, all of this, that and so much more that hung together as, like, it's spelled autistic in neon lights, and no counselor ever picked this up. So clearly they know as little as a lot of current GPs and the general public about what autism looks like in women, because I was literally telling counselors I am autistic without telling them, if you know what I mean. I was
Yeah.
listing traits that were so clearly the way autistic women move through the world, and nobody spotted it. So I have been trying. I used to read self-help books by the dozen, and I would get nothing out of them, or I'd get one line that resonated. And things like CBT don't work for autistic people because our brains don't operate in the way that CBT can help a brain. So me telling myself to be calm or to relax or to whatever doesn't actually work for my type of brain. I have an extremely busy, active brain. And sometimes actually thinking about things is better for me than trying to be blank. It's more comforting for me to obsess or perseverate on something, just think about the same thing over and over, than to try and empty myself, in a sense. The things that bring me calmness are things like writing.
Yeah.
The problem with perseveration and trying to figure yourself out all the time is you kind of have to vocalize it. So luckily I have an extremely patient husband. So what can sound like complaining from an autistic person is actually really just trying to figure themselves out, trying to figure everything out. So you might come home from a party and start analyzing everything that someone said or everybody said. What did she mean by that? What did he mean by that? My husband won't have even heard these conversations. He certainly won't have thought they meant anything.
Yeah.
Whereas I have to go through everything to try and parse it out. And it's a way of understanding social cues and how to behave around people. Autistic women, and possibly men, I don't know, have a habit of rehearsing conversations, wanting to know how things will be. A visual framework is helpful. So if I'm traveling, for example, I travel a lot on my own with my writing. I have to, do the whole checking the maps. I need to know what the hotel looks like. I nearly need to know what the bedroom looks like. And hotels have an awful habit of putting the fanciest bedroom on their website, and then you get there and it's some horrible shithole with
Yeah.
an orange bedspread, and you're like, no, it's not supposed to look like this. And
Yeah.
that, whether it sounds crazy or not, I don't care, but that's very upsetting for an autistic person, because we can think very visually, think in pictures. And when the picture is wrong, it can feel very overwhelming. So I've had a lot of meltdowns in airports and hotel receptions and different things like that. So I think autism is extremely hard for neurotypical people to understand, because it's about moving through the world in an extremely anxious and sensitive way. So everything feels large and overwhelming. All of the lights are too bright. All of the smells are too strong. Everything feels wrong, from your clothes to your, the seat you're sitting on. And it can just feel too much. And all you want to do is lie down in some safe space and recalibrate. So basically, I've stopped saying I want to be happy. I just don't say it anymore. Well, I try not to. What I want is balance. I just want balance. I want a feeling of safety in my environment. And that is why I spend so much time at home. And that is why I find the PR treadmill, for want of a better word, for promoting my books quite hard.
Yeah.
Like, I had a burnout after promoting Nora that was terrifying. And my sister saw me at the time, and she was terrified because I just looked like a ghost, like completely drained, quiet, practically unable to speak. The life literally drained out of me. And, it was then that really I had to move forward with finding out what the hell was wrong with me, because I didn't seem to fit into any box. I wasn't OCD. I wasn't bipolar. I didn't have a mental illness. And so for me, the relief of finding out that this is a neurotype, that my brain is built this way, and I thoroughly believe my late father's brain was the same, because we have a lot of traits in common. It is a genetic condition. My brain is built this way. My brain drives me forward. So what I have to do now is work with it instead of against it. And that's my project now, is finding balance, being self-forgiving, being compassionate to myself, being my own best friend, looking back at my life and all of my missteps, because I had many. I was hurt by people. There's a certain naivety about autistic people, but I also hurt other people by my actions. And so trying to look back and look at everything that happened, unplanned pregnancy, drinking and falling down and hurting myself, all of that stuff I'm looking at now through the lens of autism. And I can be less ashamed about it all and be more forgiving to myself. And I think that is the value of the diagnosis to me. And I am one of those people who wants the process. So I went to a psychology practice who specialize in neurodivergence. I want the piece of paper to say, you are this. That's just the way I like things to be. I like forms, and I like certificates, and I like things to be done to their end. I like research as well. So I went on this huge deep dive into autism and how it presents in women. And knowledge is power for me. I like to know things. Again, another autistic trait rather is a love of learning. And for me, one of my joys in life is learning. So I'm trying to lean into all of the things that are good about being autistic, rather than bemoaning the fact that I'm autistic. Okay, I'm not always thrilled I'm autistic, because it's much easier to be neurotypical. It's much easier to like what everybody else likes, to wear the right clothes, to do all the steps of life, like whatever, that are seen as societally acceptable, like marrying and then having babies and not getting divorced and not remarrying, and all of the things that I did do wrong in a sense. But then who would I be without all of the things I did and all the learning they brought me,
Yeah. I think,
yeah.
do you see, like you said, through the lens of autism, does it benefit your writing? Because you mentioned about research, and I know you do a lot of research for your writing, but does it does it help with the actual sitting down and putting the words on a page?
Yeah, because I think when you are a deep diver, a self-excavator, you have an understanding of aspects of human psychology, and that helps in building characters and in thinking about how might someone react to this? Not necessarily how I might react, but how someone else might react. I'm not coy about the fact that a lot of my female characters are versions of me. They have aspects of me in them, whether they're Emily Dickinson or the dancer Belle Bilton or James Joyce's wife, Nora Barnacle, all of whom I've written about. You know, they all contain aspects of my lens on the world. And Anne Bonny as well. I realized after I had written her that she's a neurodivergent character, that she's autistic. She's, you know, she's what I am, which is ADHD, autistic with ADHD. She's a novelty seeker. She's a person who forges forward. She sometimes is incautious, you know, and all of those things are me. I'm this weird mix. My autistic side is so rigid about time and caution and planning. And then my ADHD side is bananas, you know, it's like a 3-ring circus of, woohoo, what can I do next? And where can I go next? And, you know, all this. So I have very competing brains. I always feel like I have 2 brains, but I'm also quite monotropic, which means that I go down tunnels of interest, and that helps the writing hugely, because when I'm researching James Joyce and Nora Barnacle, I'm doing that for 2 years, and I'm in there and I'm researching as I write because I'm way too impatient to wait. And so I have this lovely research writing thing going on, and it's so vivifying to me because writing is my joy, it's my sanity, it's my balance, it's my flow, it's all the good things that I have. Not all of them. I have a lovely family as well, but you know, it is for me very much part of my well-being is my writing, and that's why I write 5 days a week, you know. And people are always saying, oh, I can't believe you have another book coming out. But like, kind of writing is all I do. I don't have another job, you know, it is my job. So I'm lucky that I love it and I feel good in it and around it. And the research is very joyful. So yes, in a way, I had set up a very autistic life without knowing I was autistic. You know, liking my own company, being alone. Writers spend most of their time alone. Researching, you know, escapism is a very autistic trait, hence the special interests part of being autistic. Loving being at home, all of that stuff that feeds into my writing is actually all very autistic. And I was going to say a lot of creative people are autistic, and I do think that's true. I think I have a lot of writer friends who are actually autistic but don't know yet. They'll know soon enough if they listen to me and read my interviews. So yeah, being in this brain is what makes me a writer, I think. So
Yeah.
I guess for years, I was telling you, I did a lot of reading of self-help. So I would have read that book Quiet, about the people who are quiet, and I would have read The Highly Sensitive Person. So I self-identified as a highly sensitive introvert. That's what I thought I was. But it's also a very good way to describe an autistic person as a highly sensitive introvert. And I just happen to be one of those autistics who doesn't have a learning disability. I am more of this sort of hyperlexic. You know, I was a very early reader. I was taught to read at the age of 3 by my mother. And then she fed my special interest, which was reading and writing, without knowing that I was autistic. So I got a lot of good at home. I do want to emphasize, when I'm criticizing my parents, I'm also leaving out all the good. You know, there was a lot of good, and I grew up in a loving home as well. But, you know, so there are different types of autistic people. We have this vision, I think, of this sort of Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man thing, which is one type of autism. And there are, obviously, it's a spectrum. There are a lot. And how neurotypical people perceive autistic people is not necessarily how we feel. So I've had a lot of people say to me over the years, oh, you're very calm, you're very serene, you're so articulate, you're comfortable in your own skin, you're this, you're that. And meanwhile, inside me, I'm a raging maelstrom of madness, and all I want to do is run away and hide under a rock. So what you see and what is going on inside a person is not the same. And I think this is something everybody needs to internalize and use in their daily life. Because when you meet someone on the street, you literally don't know who they are. You can't look at someone and know who they are or what they're feeling or what's going on for them. So this is why we need to be kind and gentle with everyone and not be judgmental and pass remarkable. And, you know, one of the other things that was leveled at me was that I was a snob.
Oh.
People thought I was snobby a lot. And I think that's because I am articulate and because I can be quite aloof. But really what I'm doing is I'm just quietly taking in what's going on and seeing is it safe to speak. That's what I'm actually doing. So I mask very heavily. I pretend I'm fine when I'm very not fine. And I'm good at it because I've been doing it for 54 years. But luckily at home, I can unmask. My husband is my brilliant supporter and rock, and he's just patient and lovely and accepts me for exactly who I am and helps me find balance, you know. So I'm very lucky in that. And I do wish, because we need a lot of support, autistic people.
Of course.
And I do wish for every autistic person a kindly and supportive spouse or partner or friend that really can get them and help them out, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I have a kind of an interest in the idea of writers kind of inhabiting real people. Like you mentioned a number of people there. And I remember when Nora came out, and it was kind of everywhere. You'd see it everywhere, thanks to your obviously campaign that you said that you had to go through. But you know that kind of pushed the book out there. And you know, I wonder why did you decide, or how do you decide to pick certain characters like Nora Barnacle, for instance? Where did that kind of initial idea come from?
Yeah, I'll just say the PR campaign is in tandem with my agent, my publisher, the PR man, and the marketing people. So they do all the groundwork, and then I just have to go out as the kind of representative of the book. So Nora, I'm a Dove, but I've been living in Galway for 28 years. So Nora was a Galway native, and I would have gone to the Bloomsday celebration at her house every year. Her mother lived in this 2-room, one up, one down house, and Nora visited there, and James Joyce visited there. So I used to go to that every year. So she was always on my radar. I had read Brenda Maddox's brilliant biography of her in my late teens. I had seen the film Nora, which is stunning. Susan Lynch is a gorgeous Nora, but it only goes up as far as their time in Trieste. So I was studying Italian by night in the university here in Galway and had to write an essay about Joyce. So I was researching Joyce. And all I was interested in was Nora. I just kept thinking about Nora. So I wrote a short story, essentially. And I just wrote the story of their first 4 or 5 months together, from when they met, when they had their first date on the 16th of June, to when they left Ireland on the 8th of October the same year, 1904. But once the story was finished, it was well published in Granta and it won a prize and, you know, great stuff. I wasn't finished with Nora. I was loving her voice. I was loving the idea of exploring her life with her children, with Lucia and Giorgio, with their life beyond Trieste in Zurich and in Switzerland, Paris. So I just kept writing and realized I had enough in this woman to sustain me for a couple of years, writing a novel about her. And I knew I'd be happy talking about her and Joyce afterwards. So you're entering into a relationship when you choose a real person, any person to write about, real or fake, that you know you have to be able to give 4 or 5 years of your life to happily. And every one of these novels I write is an act of love. I love my characters. They're flawed. They're not, they're like all of us. They have good parts and bad parts. And yeah, Nora was a magnificent person to write about. She was so stout-hearted and courageous and optimistic. You know, I'm not an optimistic person, so it's lovely to write an optimist. Joyce was our pessimist. I do believe Joyce was autistic from everything I've read and know about him. His nerviness, his tenderness, his sensitivity, his hyperlexia, obviously, as well, and his brilliance with words. So yeah, I mean, you just need to know that this will sustain me. I can do this. like obviously taking on Joyce, he's an international icon
Yeah.
and an Irish icon, and there's a kind of a 5 minute, oh, do I want to take on this? Like I'll have Joyce scholars beating me door down to kill me.
Yeah.
But in the event, I had about a 10-minute sort of wobble, and then you get into the research and you start to enjoy it and you realize you have something. And, you know, once the voice is there, you're grand, you're off, you're at the races. So, yeah, joyful experience, loved it. The reason the book did so well in the end was it was chosen as the One Dublin One book. And that's what had it everywhere, flags and bus stops and all sorts of things. And that made it a bestseller. So that's the first time that's ever happened to me in my more than 20-year writing career. So, you know, that was brilliant.
Yeah, I love the fact though that Nora was given, you know, the space to kind of live out there, you know, because it's always people will kind of been drawn to James Joyce and kind of forget about what, or sorry, not what, but who Nora was. So that idea of bringing it to kind of the public who might not know, I think that's always a fascinating thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, famous people always eclipse the spouse, and
Mm,
invariably you find the spouse was the great support,
mm,
you know, sometimes the breadwinner, often the sort of talker off the edge of the cliff, you
yeah,
know, person. Like my husband is that person to me, and Nora was that person to Joyce. And, you know, it's great for a writer to have that because it's invaluable.
yeah,
You know, writing is a very up and down business. You know, it's, you know, when it comes to things like prizes and that, it's very random. It's never really logical. Well, I won't say never. It's sometimes not logical what wins and what doesn't win, or what's
yeah,
a hit and what is not a hit. Like I haven't had many hits. Uh, I've had great critical response, but not great commercial sort of success. But to have someone there who's in your corner is very steadying. I
mm,
mean, I regularly threaten to go and get a job in Supermax because I'm so fed up of having no money and not having a regular income. Again, because of my high anxiety, not having a regular income is a real source of stress for
yeah.
me. I was really hoping to get that basic income for the arts, and I applied for it, but I didn't get it. It was a lottery selection thing,
Okay.
and I was unlucky and didn't get it, but it would have been life-changing for me. So I'm really hoping that becomes a thing, that a universal income becomes a thing, so that I can do what I need to do, which is write books without constantly stressing about money, because advances are tiny. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know what people think writers get, but honestly, unless you're really famous and have been lucky enough to have a hit, you don't get much. And it's very hard to live on that. So I rely on side gigs like mentoring and the odd bit of teaching creative writing,
Mhm.
and my small advances, and then the Arts Council, you know, and
Yeah.
you're not always going to get an Arts Council grant either. Again, it's a process and it's subjective, and you can be lucky and you can be unlucky. So the whole money part of it is the difficult part, I think. And it's something that people don't know and don't understand. And it's really hard to talk about money,
Yeah.
really hard.
Of course.
Nobody wants you to,
Yeah.
including yourself, you know.
No, no. I
But
think
it's all we talk about as
yeah.
writers when we meet at literary festivals. All we do is give out about money.
But to be fair, you know, you know, it's one of those things that goes hand in hand with artists and money. It always seems to be the same problem. The creatives are never paid what they're worth. Apart, like you said, apart from the few. I wanted to ask about Seaborn, your latest novel. The first thing that struck me about it was the amazing artwork on the front cover. Um, I don't know if there's probably a couple of editions, but the one I'm talking about, it's kind of the paint. You know the one I'm talking about,
Yeah,
obviously. But
it's no, there's only one edition.
oh, it's okay.
My American publisher didn't opted not to publish it, which was very disappointing. Again, a loss of a an advance that I was hoping to have. But yes, Karen Vaughan designed the cover. She's amazing. She's done you know, a lot of good covers in Ireland and probably abroad, but
Mhm.
it's beautiful. It's quilling. So it's that kind of paper artwork
Yeah,
effect. And like literally, sometimes the cover process is so engaging and so inclusive. And New Ireland were very inclusive with me. They let me every step of the way. So they showed me about, I'd say about 10 different designs, various sea themed designs with shells, ones with flowers, ones with women's heads and different things. I was determined for the book to be blue because blue is my favorite color, and
Right.
the sea. And
Yeah.
actually originally the book was called Blue Rush.
Oh.
And my editor said it sounded like the name of a vape, so that had to go.
Well, yeah. Have you, like a sea adventure? Are you kind of cosplaying the idea of, have you always wanted to go a sea adventure, but it's not for you? Or where did this, idea of this sea adventure come from?
Yeah, I mean, like most people, I just adore the sea, and I love beach combing is one of my things that I love to do. I'm always collecting shells and stones. A stony beach is my idea of heaven. Love swimming in the sea. I live in Ballinasloe. I live in the center of the country,
Oh,
so obviously I'm not by the sea these days. But yeah, no, just adore it. And how lovely to write. Like, I know nothing about boating, so I had to do an awful lot of research to try and get at least some of the details right about 18th century
yeah.
rigging, and the jobs on a boat and stuff like that. So that's all very enjoyable too. I read a lot of sailors diaries from that
Oh,
time, and they're full of fantastic language, and they talk about what they've eaten and how things are going on the boat, and they talk about storms, so you get a lot of info from that sort of thing. um yeah, I'm not sure I would be great at being out at sea for a long time. I think I might get a bit nervous, but I do love
hmm
an outboat trip, and I take them where I get the opportunity. So yeah, it's kind of, in a sense, it's vicarious living. I mean, I wrote
Yeah.
it during the lockdowns of the pandemic
Yeah.
because there was nothing else to do. I had planned that year, 2020, I turned 50. I had planned to take a load of holidays, and I had a load of holidays booked, but obviously the pandemic had other ideas and I couldn't
Yeah.
really go. So I was at home and I had no project planned. I wasn't going to write a novel. So I had to just kind of look in my bank of ideas and see what's in here. And then I remembered Anne Bonny. I had been interested in Anne Bonny, a young woman from Cork who was tried for piracy in 1720 in
Mm.
Jamaica. I thought there's a story here. So I went looking, and there was a story, all right, but it was very salacious, full of ridiculous detail that was clearly made up. And so I had to, well, in one way that was brilliant. I was very free
Yeah.
to invent a life for Anne. And in another way, some of the fun stuff like her cross-dressing and her um, gender bending, or whatever you want to call it, her love of men and women, was interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I can weave some of this stuff in and I can make up a whole load of other stuff. And so that's what I did. So it's probably in a way one of my most plotty novels because I
hmm
got to make up a lot of stuff. Yeah.
I uh I wonder, because obviously you really enjoy historical fiction. It's a big part. Is it a way of, this might sound like a silly question, but it was just something I was thinking of there yesterday. Is it a way of escaping the modern world or technology in general that we have now? Like, because we're so, I don't want to go around down the path of we're all addicted to phones and all that, but the idea of the modern technology being so um on top of us all the time. Do you enjoy just getting away from that and writing in those, 17th, 18th century kind of idea?
I do, absolutely. I mean, I am a committed technology user. I
Hmm.
I started a blog way back when blogs started, and I've grown to love Instagram, having hated it. I've always used Twitter, though it's a sad place these
Mm.
days. I don't really like Facebook, but I'm kind of half there. So I'm as addicted to my phone as the next person, but I grew up in a bookish house, and my sisters and I were all in the musical society and dance classes. And so we did get, one of my sisters was a stage designer. The other one made costumes for musical society, and we were all in the musical society. So we were very interested in play acting. Actually, both my parents were in amateur dramatics too.
Oh.
So we were interested in all of that. And we did make costumes and dress up. We put on plays at home. We were very wordy and liked to quote things at each other. So all of that was there from a kid. And then I suppose later I found I could go to those places. Like, so we were like Bronte and Austen fans, and we would travel to the UK and go to their homes to
Oh.
look at them and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very natural place for me to go backwards in time. I grew up in a very old house as well. And I think there's something about old walls. The house is an 18th century house. And there's something about old walls and an appreciation of old things. My parents bought and sold antiques and bric-a-brac. They had a stall in Mother Redcaps in Dublin, this fantastic indoor market that is no more. And so oldness and vintage and ancientness and stuff like that was always around us. I mean, literally the sofa would be sold out from under your arse, but you know, they were always buying and selling and that sort of thing. So I have an appreciation of old things and an interest in particularly social history and particularly women's history. And so all of those things collide and combined to make me interested in this. Now, having said all that, my first two novels were contemporary, and the novel I'm working on now, which won't see the light of day for another few years, is also contemporary. So I'm comfortable in both spaces. There's a certain joy in the historic ones, but my agent asked me this time to go contemporary for this new project.
Okay.
You know, because it's becoming a little difficult to sell these maverick women novels because there's a feeling that the market is saturated. Now, we know that anything can be a hit.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is. So I do wonder about trends and ends of trends and stuff like that. But for the moment, I'm writing contemporary and I'm happy there too. You know, again, there's research to be done.
There's always, I always find that the historical novels, obviously they never age. Whereas if now this is a certain type of contemporary novel where someone might be using the technology of the day, it becomes old quite fast because of the speed that the technology is moving in general. I even read a review. Now this is about a film that's coming out today with Jennifer Lopez in it, and it's to do with AI. And someone said it seems like it's already 2 years old. What they've written about and what they've shown on screen, and just the speed of that, and it's particularly with AI. So that's what I quite like when I do read an historical a novel. I like that it's in a certain time and place and it doesn't move in that sense. Whereas, you're already looking off to the next thing when it comes to contemporary stuff. So, but that's more, I know that's more technology wise, really.
No, but that's a great observation, that thing about it being sort of suspended in that time. I mean, absolutely, I know what you mean. And the other thing that ages is language and attitudes. And like, I am totally pro wokeism. I totally believe in inclusivity and acceptance. And when I look back at some of so I did an event last year based around my short story collection, Joyride to Jupiter, which came out, I think, in 2016. But some of the stories in it were 14 years old. So it's gone back a ways, right? And I was kind of appalled at some of the language I was using, in the sense of things like body shaming, maybe fat shaming in my own work. I was disgusted. But then, of course, we're all sort of, we were all inculcated in the anti-fat thing, believing that it was somehow people's fault if they were living in bigger bodies, and all of the shite we absorbed from mass media, etc., people with horrible agendas. And there to find it in my own work was kind of blood curdling, But thank God we move on, we learn. And I think this is a very important thing, is to keep, as we age, keep our minds open and our hearts open to people. I really, really cannot stand what's happening with immigrants at the moment. It wounds me, it annoys me, it angers me. Similarly with our trans friends, like, just shut up, people, and welcome people in, and stop being so fucking judgmental,
Do you know, I'd sorry for cutting across you there. So I was in work yesterday and I heard there was a protest. I'm in Athlone, by the way, so I'm very close to you.
Oh,
wow. Yeah, I'm only down the road. But so there was a protest in outside a place where they were going to bring in some immigrants. And I said, I'm not going to have a go at how the people were and they were doing it. But I was the exact same as you. I was just go home. Like, you don't know anything about anything. You're just out there to kind of hold up a sign because I shouldn't say you've got nothing better to do, but I said it. But that the idea, it was really annoying. And it was only like, a few minutes down the road, and I was thinking, and then there was pictures up on Facebook and all that, and it kind of takes as if there was a massive protest. There was about 12 people there. Like,
I know.
It just
we had that in Ballinasloe too,
Yeah.
and I was appalled. There was a Facebook group set up, and of course I had to look and see who was in it, who to avoid.
You have to.
But like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Diversity is only going to improve our town,
Yeah.
welcome people in, take them to our hearts. All they're going to do is enhance the town. I'm in a women's group here and it's very multicultural. It's so joyful, like, and you know, I, I don't get it.
Yeah.
It just reeks of stupidity to me and of backward thinking and of like, does anyone in this country have a relative who didn't emigrate?
Yeah.
Every single one of us
Yeah.
knows people who went either to the States or England or Australia or wherever. Like, it is the same thing. It is just the same thing. So like, oh yeah, stop, don't get me started.
No,
Because
I know.
I have fights with them online, and then my
Yeah.
husband says, give it a rest because you're only upsetting yourself. I can't sleep because I'm raging at these
Yeah.
racists.
Look, I understand totally, and I get it. And kind of talking about um immigrants and going kind of going back to what you were saying about books, looking back at books and kind of going, Jesus, that's a bit. Now I'm reading this nonfiction book about I think it's called The Lies That America Tells, and it goes back from what uh Margaret Mitchell writing Gone with the Wind, and then it becoming a film, and then it becoming almost an outlook of people like in the antebellum South and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But it's incredible. I haven't read Gone with It. I've seen the film, but I haven't read it. But it's incredible what a piece of shit that was.
yeah,
That like whatever you want to say about how well written it is or whatever, and that's fine. But the outlook, the almost like when you talk about the research you put into it, I think Margaret Mitchell did obviously put some research into it, but she already had a biased point of view of what black people were like,
yeah,
and she wrote about it in a kind of a cartoonish way, like
yeah.
black people were presented at the time in media and books, and then was made into the film, and it came even more of a thing where. The black people on set said, please don't use the N word. Like, we don't want to
Yeah.
use it. So they decided to use it anyway. And it was kind of overlooking. And I talked about Mahatma McDaniel, who is such a legend. She was first African American person to win an Oscar, and she was sitting in a segregated area, had to walk up to get her Oscar. And it really irritates me, but I'm fascinated in finding out about it. And I guess that I'm sure you've seen that looking back at historical fiction or reading about history in general. It's quite upsetting, and it isn't that long ago when it comes
No,
to.
it's not that long ago, and obviously it's continuing as well.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, I mean, in the first iteration of my novel, Anne's friend Bedelia was actually a black enslaved girl, and my editor said to me, "Nobody's going to publish." Well, in so many words, right? I'm not going to quote her because
Yeah,
she didn't say this directly to me. This was communicated to me through my agent that no one will publish a white middle-aged Irish woman writing about a young black enslaved girl in today's publishing climate.
right.
And I had to take that on board. And so I changed Bedelia to a white indentured servant, which is what she is in the book now. And there's still issues around consent because
Mhm.
Anne is her mistress and Bedelia is her servant, but they are in a very close relationship. And I tried for balance and I gave Bedelia good, quiet strength and all of that. But, there is a thing not about us without us, and that is for black people, for disabled people, etc., that really, if you're going to write about something like this, you have to do the widest possible research and be extremely sensitive. Like, I cannot write about an American plantation without having black people on
Yeah.
it, and I cannot do that without mentioning in slavery
Mhm.
and the cruelties done to them. But I had to tone it down hugely to make it more palatable for an audience. And in one way you think, but why? That's rewriting history, that's making it more palatable. And in another way you think, if it's harmful for black people to read this about their ancestors, well, then you have to. So there's this very tricky balance
Yeah.
between being sensitive and rewriting history. And there's still a lot of thinking and conversation to go on around this. But yeah, I mean, appalling treatment of black actors, appalling treatment sometimes of, other actors, and then books not getting published because of issues around who has written them.
Mm.
I do know certain books are wrong-headed,
Yeah.
but also give me credit for my intelligence and
Yeah.
my sensitivity and my research, etc., etc. So, you know, who gets to write whose story? Obviously, it would be much better if Black people wrote Black people's stories. And there are certain writers who've written them in bad ways. And we'll give Margaret Mitchell of Gone with the Wind the benefit of the
Yeah.
doubt. She was living in a certain society
Yeah.
in a certain era, you know, and we can say that too about, say, James Joyce.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of misogyny in Ulysses. It's still an insanely brilliant book, and there are very powerful women in it. And I know from my research that Joyce worshipped women and respected them. Okay.
Yeah.
In many ways. In other ways, he didn't, because he was a complex human, the same way we're all complex humans. So
Yeah.
I think I'm interested in the complexity of these issues, and I'm interested in the sensitivity of them. And I don't think there are easy answers to any of this, but Not About Us Without Us is an okay
Yeah.
place to start from, rather
Yeah.
than, you
But the
know.
conversations, though, these kind of conversations have to happen as well, because we kind of pussyfoot around them a little bit, and then it becomes, we never kind of see what was, back in the day, what was being done wrong.
Yeah,
And we have to, like, you're right, the situations that people are born into and experience are their experiences that, we can't say, well, you're wrong or whatever. But, the fact that you had to change a character, but knowing kind of from what I've read of yours, you write in an emotional and sympathetic way towards characters. And you mentioned earlier on about you write about the bad stuff as well as the good stuff, because none of us are angels.
yeah,
So in your hands, I would trust it, But that's not to say with every writer, I'm going to go, yeah,
exactly.
I'd love to hear their ideas on whatever it is,
Yeah, exactly. It's tricky. Like, I opted to change the character, right? I
Mm.
wasn't forced. But the publishers are nervous. I'm
Mm.
not talking about publishers in Ireland. I'm talking about publishers in the States and some in London as well. They're nervous about, because there have been backlashes against writers who wrote certain things. Um, Generally, it didn't do the books any harm because it just made them sell more because
Yeah.
everybody wanted to see what was going on. But, there have been huge criticisms. I think the point is that a white woman writing about this stuff is maybe preventing a Black woman from getting
Yeah.
published. And there needs to be more balance in everything, everything, every walk of life between um, different races and nations or whatever. And that's where we need to start from, not be trying to climb to, just start from there and get some balance in. So I wasn't forced to do this, I
Mhm.
chose to do it, but my American publisher still felt, and I understand, I'm not criticizing them, but they still felt that they couldn't publish the book. So that's their prerogative, and
Yeah.
that's fine. Obviously I was disappointed, but like, I'm over it. I'm way over it. The book has done really well
Yeah.
here, and I've had fantastic reviews, gorgeous audience reaction. You know, I get lovely messages from people on Instagram, etc., etc. So I'm happy with the reception the book has gotten here, and people get it. But I would have liked more of the slavery stuff to stay in
Yeah.
as well. Enslaved people stuff.
Yeah. Of course, that was your, initial idea.
Yeah.
Why is Ulysses such a daunting book for people, do you think?
The sheer size of it, like, I mean, it's it's like 3 pounds or something in weight. It's
Is
this
it?
enormous object. But like, I suppose it feels more like a collection of linked short stories. Each
Mm.
episode is very different in tone, is very different in content. Some of them are slightly impenetrable.
Yeah.
Some of them are more like riffs. So I suppose I think the best way to do it, and for anybody who is daunted, is read it with a group. So there are groups
Oh,
online that you can join, and you go chapter by chapter with a guide, and they will open the book out to you and help you understand it. I found that brilliant. I did 2 read-throughs of Ulysses with groups, um, because there's often people in the group who've read it over and over, and they've a lot
yeah.
of knowledge, and they can add a lot to your reading experience. Um,
That's a
it's a
great idea.
beautiful, yeah, and it's a
Yeah.
beautiful experience. It's a beautiful book, and it gets great discussion going in a group. So the Irish Right or the James Joyce Centre in Dublin has a group that starts, I think, usually in February and it finishes in time for Bloomsday. Caroline Elbay runs that, absolutely brilliant. And Molly did have a group, Molly, the Museum of Literature Ireland. I'm not sure if it's still going, but worth checking out. And also Sweeney's Pharmacy in Lincoln Place have several groups. They do Finnegan's Wake, for goodness sake, which I'm determined to get through one day.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
weird one because my dad talked about Ulysses before, but he said he tried Finnegan's Wake and he found it like I'll use your word impenetrable. I read I remember reading Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace because
Mm.
everybody said it's like the 90s Ulysses. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, maybe it'll be easier to understand then, you know. And I loved it. Like, you know, I actually got repetitive strain injury on my thumb from that book, just 'cause it's so big. But what I find funny about the Ulysses, because there's so many editions of Ulysses, but there's one that you can buy. I can't remember it. I don't know if it's vintage classics, but it's they've made it smaller, but they've made the print so tiny. And I wonder if that's just to draw people in. They're like, well, it's not actually that big, Ulysses. But then you open it up and the print, you needed like a little magnifying glass to read it.
Yeah, very off-putting.
Yeah,
The other thing you can do with Ulysses, if you can't join a group because of geography or money, there's several really good guides to Ulysses. One is published by New Island Press and it's written by Daniel Mulhall. So he takes chapter by chapter. So you'd read the
right,
chapter yourself and then you'd read Mulhall's thoughts on it. Declan
right.
Kybert has one as well. Again, you know, with totally different takes on each chapter. So I was using a combination of my group and these guides because obviously I was writing a book about Joyce. I had to
Yeah,
understand it. I
yeah,
had to have read it from end to end. There's no point in this reading bits like
yeah.
so. There are ways to do it that are very, very joyful, and that's one of them.
Brilliant. I am. We always ask this, Nuala.
Yeah.
What do you like to do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I like to go to markets,
Hmm.
car boot sales, charity shops. I make collages. I like making
Oh,
collages. I have my two sons are grown up and gone, but I have a 14-year-old daughter, and we sometimes have mother-daughter expeditions, you know. We go up to Athlone actually.
all right. Oh, it's a fine town.
And eat in yakisoba and
Yeah,
maybe go to the shopping centres and I do love walking in forests.
yeah.
So there's a few around Roscommon and around here in Ballinasloe. I like walking in nature. Um, yeah, so that's the kind of thing I do, all very low key and
Yeah, but that's ideal. That's ideal, you know. So I think everyone should go get a copy of Seaborn and read it, honestly.
yeah.
And they should get Nora. They should get all your books, really. But you know, um,
Can I give
for
a shout out for the
of
audiobook of
course,
Seaborn? It's voiced by a woman called Breffney Houlihan, and she's done a magnificent job. I normally can't listen to my audiobooks from end to end because there's something cringe about listening to your own
yeah,
words being
yeah.
voiced. But Breffney did a magnificent job, and she made it so exciting that I actually listened to the whole thing. So a shout out for the audiobook for those of you
Yeah.
who don't like reading or can't read for whatever reason. It's really rather good.
Brilliant. And where can people find you, Nuala? Obviously on Instagram, like you mentioned.
I'm on Instagram, yeah.
Yeah,
I have a website, newloconnor.com. I update it as much as I can, but at the moment I'm doing so many events
yeah.
and side things that I don't have time to update it much, but it's up to date-ish. I am on Twitter, even though I shouldn't be. I just can't seem to leave. I tried all the other ones, Threads, Blue Sky, and none of
Oh
them really
yeah.
gelled with me. So I'm still on Twitter. So yeah, I'm there and you can contact me through those places. And my DMs are open, as they say.
And they are, because Nuala responded very quickly to us and we're very appreciative of it. Nuala, you've been a brilliant guest. Thank you so much for giving your time.
Thanks, Derek. Pleasure.
Listen, if you don't mind, would you stick with me for a minute? I'll close this out, take a quick photo of the screen. It's just something that we do.
Yeah.
And
Fix
we'll
my
get
hair.
off. I have to thank John, but obviously for doing the YouTube stuff kind of thing for us, because I don't know how. Obviously, I always thank my mum, my dad, my granddad during Calvin. Subscribe to YouTube. We're also on Instagram, Facebook. We did manage to leave X. We just managed to leave X. We're also on Spotify, Apple, Anchor. I also want to mention Google Podcasts is no more in a couple of weeks' time for, I don't know, obviously monetary reasons, whatever. I'm sure Google's broke, like, but that's not happening anymore. So that's a couple more weeks, and you'll have to go on to the other ones. But obviously, everyone who tuned in today, thank you so much. And Nuala, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week from a different bunker. All right. Take care. Bye.